we attribute certain motivations and certain characteristics to the government as a unique institution. We can do the same thing with corporations. And what we know about corporations is, first of all, that the Supreme Court back in the late 19th century legally defined them as a person under the 14th Amendment. And therefore, they are entitled to all of the same rights and privileges of the people. Just recently, in 2010, the Supreme Court said that corporations have free speech rights. It cannot be infringed through campaign finance rules. And therefore, they can donate unlimited amounts of money to political campaigns through their coffers. So Exxon, which makes $3 billion in a single day, can take that $3 billion, which is which is actually as much as will be spent on political advertising in the entire 2012 election season. They can take $3 billion and dump it all into political ads for their candidate. But the thing about a corporation is that it has limited liability. When you incorporate something, the corporation becomes responsible for everything that it does as a legal fiction. So if Monsanto kills 10,000 people in America because of some product they created, Monsanto is responsible for that, and Monsanto will be fined. And maybe some of the management will be fined. But Monsanto, unlike a person that kills 10,000 people, can't be jailed. At most, they can have their corporate charter revoked. And so essentially, a corporation has what kings and queens had in earlier times. They have infallibility. They are infallible. They cannot be held. The owners, the people who actually own the stock in corporations, cannot be held responsible for what their corporations do. They have been granted legal protection from anything the corporation does on their behalf. They earn all the profits. They don't have to pay the costs, unless those costs are financial. So the first thing about a corporation is that it has limited liability. It has no responsibility at all, other than its bottom line. The second thing is that it is actually legally obligated to maximize profits. It is not obligated to serve the public interest regardless of what institutional advertising will tell you. Northrop Grumman is not in business to help veterans. They're in business to make money. They maintain the fiction that they are here to help veterans in the military, but they only do that insofar as it makes them money. Now, I'm not saying this to impugn corporations. That's what they should do. That's what they're designed to do. That's what they are legally obligated to do. This is not controversial. This is a fact. Their public relations departments will try to obscure this, as they should, because we would not feel very comfortable knowing that McDonald's goal is not to serve us food, but to make money. In the 1980s, something very interesting happened to the news business. That is, it became a business. Prior to the 1980s, a condition of using the airwaves, which are licensed to companies and individuals, a condition was that organizations needed a news division to serve the public interest, that they had to provide information to the people so that we could have an educated citizenry. And that was the deal that media struck, starting out with radio way back in the 20s and the 1930s. They struck a deal. They said, listen, we can't do this alone. We can't organize ourselves. We keep stepping on one another's toes. Our radio signals are crossing over one another. What we need is the government to regulate us so that we can create this business. So we can create this business called radio. And we think it's going to be a really good business for a lot of people, and indeed they were right. And government said, okay, I tell you what, we're going to use taxpayer dollars and governing authority, and we're going to do it for you. We're going to set up this whole system so that you can operate. But in exchange for us giving you a license, you're going to serve the public interest by providing information to people at a loss. And so news was always a loss leader. But in the 1980s, the regulations changed, and suddenly news became a profit division. And so news started to experience the same pressure as all of the rest of the corporation. It had to make money. And there are two ways that you make money, right? You lower costs and you increase income. So you lower your costs and you increase your income. If you're talking about news, the first thing you're talking about is Ideally, what you would do is have somebody else collect the news for you. You don't want to collect the news yourself because it costs a lot of money to collect the news. It costs a ton of money to pay somebody to travel around the country and to investigate what it is that the government is doing, or what it is that some big corporation is doing, or what it is that some local government is doing. It costs a lot of money to pay for those people to go around and do that. You got to pay them a salary, you got to pay them benefits, you got to pay for all their expenses while they do it. So one of the things you can do is you can say, you know what, we should just contract this out. Let's just let somebody else collect the news. And so starting in the 1980s, news organizations became very dependent on organizations, public relations professionals. So the Pentagon has a group of public affairs specialists that actually used to come to Oklahoma to get trained. I went through a couple of those training sessions. You know, GE has a public relations division. Every senator and congressperson has a communications specialist. All major institutions have a communication specialist, and their job is to get their institution's story into the news. And so the temptation in the 80s was, let's stop collecting news ourselves, and let's just go to, say, the White House. And we won't, Woodward and Bernstein, that's a waste of money. Let's just let them give us the news, which they did. Now that was a real problem. Back in 2003, that method of getting information from the White House was firmly entrenched. And so it became possible for the Bush administration to say, you will not report information that contradicts our story about going to war with Iraq. If you do, you will not have access to the White House anymore. You will lose your job, and your news organization will no longer get free news from us. And Lance Bennett, the book called When the Press Fails, documents extensively how there was plenty of information available warning us about what would happen in Iraq. But it was never reported because of stuff like this happening over and over again. So this becomes a real problem all over. Now back in the 1960s, for every one public relations professional, you had one investigative journalist. Now, for every one investigative journalist, there are 3 public relations professionals in America. So news has shifted from news hounds going out to find the truth to official representatives of institutions conveying their point of view to the public. The second reason that this is a problem is, in order to make money in media, you've got to have advertisers. So now what happens when you're KELOLAND News and one of your primary advertisers is, say, I don't know, Billion Auto. Billion owns, Jack Billion, I think is his name. He owns like almost all of the car dealerships in Sioux Falls. He owns a ton of them. What happens if one of your reporters gets information that Billion is ripping the public off? And you've got this information, and you're ready to go public with it. You go to Billion, you say, we got this story here. You're ripping the public off. We want your comment. And they say, I'll tell you what our comment is. Our comment is, you run that story, we pull all the advertising from your station, and you go broke tomorrow. That's our comment. What does Kello do? They pulled the story.
Are they still obligated to report the news?
No.
As mandate from the FCC?
Absolutely not. Well, that's a good question. Are they obligated to report the news? I don't think that they are obligated. The regulatory regime over media has become really convoluted since the 80s. You've got all sorts of stuff going on. But I don't think, what I do know is that they're not obligated to report any information. They may be obligated to report news, but they are not obligated to report any specific kind of news. So, they can choose what stories to report. Right, they could just do the weather, or they could do another story about the Humane Society or Second Chance, or